Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God. Back with you with the next video in my series reading White Fang by Jack London. Without further ado, returning to White Fang as read by Lord Naren White. Chapter 5 The Covenant. When December was well along, Mitsa and Klukooch went with him. One sled he drove himself, drawn by dogs he had traded for or borrowed. A second and smaller sled was driven by Mitsa, and to this was harnessed a team of puppies. It was more of a toy affair than anything else, yet it was the delight of Mitsa, who felt that he was beginning to do a man's work in the world. Also, he was learning to drive dogs and to train dogs, while the puppies themselves were being broken into the harness. Furthermore, the sled was of some service, for it carried nearly 200 pounds of outfit and food. White Fang had seen the camp dogs toiling in the harness, so that he did not resent overmuch the first placing of the harness upon himself. About his neck was put a moss-stuffed collar, which was connected by two pulling traces to a strap that passed around his chest and over his back. It was to this that was fastened the long rope by which he pulled at the sled. There were 7 puppies in the team. The others had been born earlier in the year and were 9 and 10 months old, while White Fang was only 8 months old. Each dog was fastened to the sled by a single rope. No 2 ropes were of the same length, while the difference in length between any 2 ropes was at least that of a dog's body. Every rope was brought to a ring at the front end of the sled. The sled itself was without runners, being a birch bark toboggan, with upturned forward end to keep it from plowing under the snow. This construction enabled the weight of the sled and the load to be distributed over the largest snow surface, for the snow was crystal powder and very soft. Observing the same principle of widest distribution of weight, the dogs at the ends of their ropes radiated fan fashion from the nose of the sled, so that no dog trod in another's footsteps. There was furthermore another virtue in the fan formation. The ropes of varying length prevented the dogs attacking from the rear those that ran in front of them. For a dog to attack another, it would have to turn upon one at a shorter rope, in which case it would find itself face to face with the dog attacked, and also it would find itself facing the whip of the driver. But the most peculiar virtue of all lay in the fact that the dog strove to attack one in front of him, must pull the sled faster, and that the faster the sled traveled, the faster could the dog attacked run away. Thus, the dog behind could never catch up with the one in front. The faster he ran, the faster ran the one he was after, and the faster ran all the dogs. Incidentally, the sled went faster, and thus, by cunning indirection, did man increase his mastery over the beasts. Mitsa resembled his father, much of whose grey wisdom he possessed. In the past he had observed Lip Lip's persecution of White Fang, but at that time Lip Lip was another man's dog, and Mitsa had never dared more than to shy an occasional stone at him. But now Lip Lip was his dog, and he proceeded to wreak his vengeance on him by putting him at the end of the longest rope. This made Lip Lip the leader, and was apparently an honor. But in reality it took away from him all honor, and instead of being bully and master of the pack, he now found himself hated and persecuted by the pack. Because he ran at the end of the longest rope, the dogs had always the view of him running away before them. All that they saw of him was his bushy tail and fleeing hind legs, a view far less ferocious and intimidating than his bristling mane and gleaming fangs. Also, dogs being constituted in their mental ways, the sight of him running away gave desire to run after him and feeling that he ran away from them. The moment the sled started, the team took after Lip Lip in a chase that extended throughout the day. At first, he had been prone to turn upon his pursuers, jealous of his dignity and wrathful, but at such times Mitsa would throw the stinging lash of the 30-foot caribou gut whip into his face and compel him to turn tail and run on. Lip Lip might face the pack, but he could not face that whip, and all that was left of him to do was to keep his long rope taut and his flanks ahead of the teeth of his mates. But a still greater cunning lurked in the recesses of the Indian mind. To give point to unending pursuit of the leader, Mitsa favored over him the other dogs. These favors aroused them in jealousy and hatred. In their presence, Mitsa would give them meat and would give it to him only. This was maddening to them. They would rage around just outside the throwing distance of the whip, while Lip Lip devoured the meat and Mitsa protected him. And when there was no meat to give, Mitsa would keep the team at a distance and make believe to give meat to Lip Lip. White Fang took kindly to the work. He had traveled a greater distance than the dogs in the yielding of himself to the rule of the gods, and he had learned more thoroughly the futility of opposing their will. In addition, the persecution he had suffered from the pack had made the pack less to him in the scheme of things, and man more. He had not learned to be dependent on his kind for companionship. Besides, Quiche was well nigh forgotten, and the chief outlet of expression that remained to him was in the allegiance he tendered the gods he had accepted as his masters. So he worked hard, learned discipline, and was obedient. Faithfulness and willingness characterized his toil. There are essential traits of the wolf and the wild dog when they have become domesticated, and these traits White Fang possessed in unusual measure. A companionship did exist between White Fang and the other dogs, but it was one of warfare and enmity. He had learned to play with them. He knew only how to fight, and fight with them he did, returning to them 100-fold the snaps and slashes they had given him in the days when Lip Lip was leader of the pack. But Lip Lip was no longer leader, except when he fled away before his mates at the end of his rope, the sled bounding along behind. In camp, he kept close to Mitsa or Grey Beaver or Kloo Cooch. He did not dare venture away from the gods. The fangs of all dogs were against him, and he tasted to the dregs the persecution that had been White Fang's. With the overthrow of Lip Lip, White Fang could have become leader of the pack, but he was too morose and solitary for that. He merely thrashed his teammates, otherwise he ignored them. They got out of his way when he came along, nor did the boldest of them ever dare to rob him of his meat. On the contrary, they devoured their own meat hurriedly, for fear that he would take it away from them. White Fang knew the law well, to oppress the weak and obey the strong. He ate his share of meat as rapidly as he could, and then woe the dog that had not yet finished. A snarl and a flash of fangs, and that dog would wail his indignation to the uncomforting stars, while White Fang finished his portion for him. Every little while, however, one dog or another would flame up in revolt and be promptly subdued. Thus White Fang was kept in training. He was jealous of the isolation in which he kept himself in the midst of the pack, and he fought often to maintain it. But such fights were of brief duration. He was too quick for the others. They were slashed open and bleeding before they knew what had happened, were whipped almost before they had begun to fight. As rigid as the sled discipline of the gods was the discipline maintained by White Fang amongst his fellows. He never allowed them any latitude. He compelled them to an unremitting respect for him. They might do as they pleased amongst themselves. That was no concern of his, but it was his concern that they leave him alone in his isolation, get out of his way when he elected to walk among them, and at all times acknowledge his mastery over them. A hint of stiff-leggedness on their part, a lifted lip or a bristle of hair, and he would be upon them, merciless and cruel, swiftly convincing them of the error of their way. He was a monstrous tyrant. His mastery was rigid as steel. He oppressed the weak with a vengeance. And we'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.